The sponsor of today's video is yours truly. That's right, me. Nobody's sponsoring this channel. But if there is one person who deserves a shout out, it's my boss, because he's the one that actually gave me this wood. This is red oak, and it was used for the headers and some door casing in a house where we were working. And these were just getting thrown out, and he was like, hey, why don't you take these pieces of free wood and see if you can make something? And of course, me being basically broke was like, yeah, sure, all right, I'll try it. So just gluing up these red oak strips to make some panels here. Time to break out the big clamps. I actually just went to Home Depot, bought these. I think these were all like $100. And then just gluing these two smaller panels together. Nothing super interesting here. I might also mention that every product, including these Bessie clamps that I use in this video, will be linked down in the description. The entire reason I placed this cinder block on top of this panel glue up was just to keep any bowing out while it was drying, just in case you were wondering. So because I didn't have a sander at this point, I actually decided that rather than sanding, I was just going to trim off the edges of this table. No, not a track saw, table saw, just a simple jig setup to make a regular old DeWalt circular saw, basically a track saw. And yes, no good dust collection, it's just using a leaf blower there. And then just measuring here to make sure that table is the same width at both ends, because, well, that's kind of important. And hearing protection, always wear hearing protection. And then just checking my length measurements, and it was within like 1/1000th of an inch or thereabouts. Anyway, the next clip we will be sanding, so I'll see you then. I decided that in order to actually have any chance at making this table look presentable, I needed to go down to the big box store, namely Home Depot, picked up this Makita random orbital sander. Nothing fancy about it, but it is going to work in order to really just get done what I need to be done. And then just using a pretty dull Irwin chisel here to get off the excess globs of glue that I did not wipe off the underside of the table. And then I just went back to sanding. I went from 80 grit up through actually just 120 grit, hit the edges real quick here, switched to hand sanding for just a sec, and then grabbed this 3M sanding block that I had lying around because I don't have a router, and was actually able to put a pretty accurate 1/8 inch round over around the entire perimeter of the tabletop. Here's a pro tip: water pop. And I generally just do this once. You can do it more if you want to, but all water popping does is raise the grain so that the finish doesn't when you apply wood finish, because if the finish raises the grain, you're gonna have problems. And then I just sanded back up to 120 grit. Nothing real special here. So there's this really ugly knot hole, and my version of fixing it is just to enlarge that hole a little bit, make it a little more circular. Then I grabbed this scrap cutoff of red oak, I used this rasp and that bench grinder to kind of file it down until I found a size that I thought would fit, and then from there just went to the 3M sanding block, and then to some, I believe it's 1,000 grit wet or dry sandpaper, then rasped out the actual hole itself. And you can see here the fit's not perfect, but the fit is actually pretty good. And then I just used some Titebond 1 and sawdust to create this, faux wood putty to fill in the imperfections. And then off camera, sanded it back up to 120 grit. And then I went on to laying out the design for the table base. Here I'm just centering the table legs off the sides of the table, just trying to get a nice even measurement and make sure those are about the same distance off the sides. They're about the same distance. Each table leg is about the same distance off each side, just so everything not only looks nice and even, but actually is nice and even. And then just using a standard drill bit here to put in some holes for the threaded inserts. And then this little dado guy, I actually don't know the correct name for this, but that just lets these little threaded inserts here sit flush, so the table base is not even going to be touching those, which is super cool. And then just did the exact same thing on the other side. I'm not really sure why, but I kind of chose this like snake's back pattern, I guess just because I thought it looked cool. So anyway, the finish I'm using here is Rubio Monocoat. Mixing ratio is 3:1, so even for people like me who can't get the simplest mixing ratios right, well, even I was able to do it, so anyone can do it. And then just remember to wipe off about 10-15 minutes after the application of the Rubio Monocoat. Remember to wipe it all off. Leaving any Rubio Monocoat on is not going to give you any more protection. And then just the same thing here, and although I didn't get it on camera, I did wipe off all the excess Rubio off camera because I wanted to spare all you guys the boring footage. So here's a pro tip, definitely not from me, but actually from Cam from Blacktail Studio, and that is use these maroon pads. I believe these are made by 3M. I actually just picked these up at Home Depot. But this really, all I'm doing here is just scuffing up the surface, in this case the bottom of the table. You can see the threaded inserts there. And what this does, should you choose to put a second coat of finish on, is just create a better bond and really a more complete finish. And also remember, as well, at least as you can, to sand, or actually just buff in this case, with the grain of the wood. You can see I kind of went side to side there for a second, but do as best as you can if you're going to do this, to go up and down. And then also here, I'm just going to save you guys a little bit of time because nobody cares that I'm doing this at the same time, just to prove that I actually did though. Putting on a second coat on the bottom here, buffed it in, wiped it all off. Please remember, leaving any Rubio Monocoat on is not going to give you any more protection. And then I'll get back with you guys when we apply the second coat to the top. Here, once again, I'm just going to hit the top with that maroon pad, really scuff up that surface nicely. Nothing new here. And here's pro tip from Blacktail Studio once again. Just look into the light and see if you can see any shiny spots, any spots you didn't hit, because you really want to make sure that you evenly buff the whole thing out. And then just apply that second coat of finish. Here I'm just drizzling it back on top, using another Scotch-Brite pad to buff it in. Really nothing new here. Just be sure to remember to work that finish in as evenly as possible, even though it's the second coat. And then, like I'm doing here with the shop towels, just buff it all off. Remember not to leave any on, at least as best as humanly possible. I'm going to let this dry for 48 hours at least, and I'll be back with you when we attach the table base. So here's the table legs that I mentioned briefly before that I got off of Amazon. Just using those threaded inserts and furniture bolts. Once again, to really just tighten those legs down, get everything nice flush to the bottom of the table base. And you may have noticed that I had to trim off the ends of some of these because, well, from this handy shot here, they would have actually poked through the tabletop, and that's just not doable. And you may also notice that these threaded inserts, I actually accidentally added an extra one here. It doesn't really matter though. So if this table is shipped to you and you buy it, it's not going to be that difficult to put them in. Just follow where the holes are a little larger and grab yourself an Allen key, tighten those down, as I am here. Also, something to keep in mind is there is a little bit of scratches and scrapes on the bottom of this. Fortunately, those can probably be handled with a touch-up marker, and no one's going to be lying down looking underneath the table, but that's just a little annoyance that, I never like to have that happen on any of my projects. I think it may have been dinged by a little bolt or screw or something. But, yeah, just thought I'd throw that out there. And then probably the most annoying thing that I realized toward the end of this build was, I didn't cover the tabletop with painter's plastic or anything, so a little bit of humidity got to both sides, which caused this kind of warping. It's not super noticeable. Also, there's these little water markings from a couple of drops of water that got on the table. Again, not super noticeable, but just something that should be addressed. Nobody, and certainly not me, likes to admit that they screwed up. And while this doesn't really harm the structural integrity of the table, it's something that should be touched on and for potential buyers to be aware of. All that being said, here's some final shots I took in my studio, aka basement. And overall, this little centerpiece just looks really nice. And I'm actually super happy with the way that it turned out. This piece is for sale on Etsy now, and there's a link in the description below. If you guys think I earned your subscription, I'd be honored, and I'll catch you on the next one.